And to ask that question is to answer it. The answer is absolutely no. There is no unrighteousness in God. But let me just play with this, tweak this a little bit. Every Christian will say, yes, I believe in the sovereignty of God. But when you begin to probe people and ask them how they understand the sovereignty of God, it takes about 5 minutes before there's not very much sovereignty left. People mean by saying they believe in the sovereignty of God that they believe that God has authority over his creation, or that he has power over his creation. And those are aspects of God's sovereignty. But as soon as you ask the question about the sovereignty of grace, that's when people start jumping off the boat. Because they don't want to believe that God has the authority or the right to grant his mercy and grace as he wills. And that's what's at stake in this discussion. Now, if God were committing an injustice in all of this, I could understand the wailing and the protest of it all. And if God looked at a world filled with innocent people and decided to save some and damn others, there would be injustice in God. There would be unrighteousness in God. But only once in all of history has God ever punished an innocent man. And that was only after that innocent man willingly, for the sake of the elect, assumed the culpability of the sin of his people. And once the sin, your sin, my sin, was transferred to Jesus, Jesus in the sight of God is no longer innocent. He's innocent in and of himself, but by imputation, he's now the quintessential embodiment of evil. In one sense, the most obscene concentration of wickedness that ever occurred on this planet was on the cross, when Christ took sins of millions of people on his own person and on his own back. And it was only after that transfer, for which he was willing to submit, that God punished him. So in reality, God has never ever punished an innocent person, because it would be unrighteous and unjust for God to do that. God doesn't do that. And so when we think about this difficult question of election and of God's choosing, you have to understand that when God makes his decision and he is contemplating those whom he will save or not save, he is contemplating them as fallen people. God's question is not, am I going to rescue some innocent people and allow other innocent people to perish? But his question is, just like the governor's question, am I going to exercise grace and mercy to some guilty people, and the rest of the people allow them to receive my justice? You see, the beauty in this is that in God's sovereign election, both his marvelous grace and mercy are manifested, and his relentless commitment to justice is also made manifest. Grace is an easy concept to define as unmerited favor. But to get that idea from our brains into our bloodstream is one of the most difficult tasks in the Christian life. And to get it to stay there, to stick there, is even more difficult. And I like to say to my students in the seminary, that the minute you begin to think that God owes you mercy, or owes anyone mercy, let a bell go off in your brain. Let an alarm buzzer sound, a warning that says to you, tilt. You're no longer thinking about mercy. Because again, mercy that is required is not mercy. If we think that God owes us grace, we've stopped thinking about grace. We're now thinking about justice. And the other thing I say to my students, as I've said to you, don't ever ask God for justice. You might get it. Because the worst thing that could ever happen to me would be to receive the full measure of God's justice from his hand. The only way I can draw a breath in this world, and the only way I can even hope of going to heaven, is by his sovereign grace.